home studio engineers. Thank you so much for checking out the Home Recording Network. I'm Joel Prue, and right now we are on day 16 of this 30-day journey to help you get more professional and more polished home studio mixes. Up until now, we've covered some things that you should consider before you even start mixing. We've covered all the drums in this song. And last video, we talked about how I usually track bass guitar in my studio. Now, in case you missed it, I'm just going to play a clip of the song we're covering during these 30 days. And I'll occasionally solo the bass and drums since we're going to be covering the bass guitar today.
These kings and queens, they all fall, headless back into oblivion. Destined unaware just what will be, and overtake the throne and sink to the bottom. Oh, we're fighting for.
All right, so let's get into the bass guitar. But first, if this tutorial series or any of my other videos or content has helped you at all, don't forget to like and subscribe so that I can reach more engineers just like you that might need help or might need some guidance. All right, so we have 3 bass tracks in this song, and if you watched the last video on how I track these, the first bass track is just the DI signal through the Sans amp pedal that I was using. And these are all DI signals, but the first bass track actually has the EQ from the pedal and the drive from the pedal. The second track here is just a boring old DI signal. It's always a good idea to grab one of those. And then the third track is sort of a parallel bass track. The bass player actually used a distortion pedal, so we were going for a real distorted bass tone for this rock song. All of these bass signals actually just end up at the bass bus, and that's where most of the mixing work is done. There are some plugins on the tracks themselves. So let's go over those. So on our Sans amp track, we just have an amp sim, and I'm using the Slate Overloud product for all of these. And guys, I really don't care what, amp sim products you're using. There's a lot of them out there, and it's not the point of this video that you gotta use what I use or use the plugins I use. I like the Slate Overloud product. I have a bunch of different amp sim products. That's just the one that I like the most. So this is the Sans amp track. I'll let you listen to it. And then our DI track sounds a little like this. Again, this has the Overloud amp sim on there. Just a bit of a darker bass sound. Now let's take a listen to both of them together. And then we add in our distortion track. It's really a gnarly bass sound, and you're going to notice that in the mix, you can't really hear that distortion too much. It just sort of helps the bass cut through the mix a bit.
Kings and queens, they all fall,
It's worth noting that on this distorted bass track, I have a high pass filter all the way up to about 250 because I really don't want any of the low end from this track. This is all about the high end of the distortion track, all the low ends actually coming from the other two bass tracks. So this is what it sounds like on its own. Pretty cool, right? Sounds really cool. So let's go over the bass bus a little bit and I'll show you some of the plugins that I have on here. What I'll usually do with bass is just start with virtual mix rack and one of these virtual preamp emulations to add some more drive and saturation to the bass signal. So we have the London on here doing some saturation, and we have a tiny bit of compression with the distressor. So we have a super fast attack and release on this to really tame down the peaks and catch any of those louder notes that he's playing. But it's really just a moderate amount of compression. Now, I will say that on bass guitar, I do like to compress a lot, and there is another compressor in the chain here. So I'm using the 1176, the CLA 76, and these are kind of my go-to settings for bass guitar. And usually have the attack on 5, which on the 1176 is pretty fast attack. And again, I have a fast release down here, so it's on 6. And we're getting a decent amount of compression here. Now, with bass guitar, especially for me, it's an instrument that I like to really flatten the signal on. I like to use a lot of compression because if we have inconsistent bass and low end in our song, it's just going to sound kind of odd. So I like to really compress this instrument. And you might know that if you've watched my mix training. If you haven't seen that, go to the description. It's free. I do it a couple times a week and you can see more about my compression techniques. Now, maybe you don't want such a flattened bass. Maybe you want more of the attack coming out. So you could always slow this attack down depending on what you're going for. But again, for rock, which I'm usually mixing, I really like a smoother bass sound, and that's what you get with this faster attack. Now, let's get back to the EQ. So I'm going to open Virtual Mix Rack, and you're going to notice that there's barely any EQ on this bass guitar. And this is kind of the advantage to using the SansAmp pedal like I've done. So if you get your EQ right on the way in, you're not going to need to do as much work in the mix, and it just makes life a little bit easier on us. But I will show you the typical areas where I boost on a bass if I need to. If you want your bass to be brighter and you want to hear more of the pick attack or the finger pluck, I'll just bring this shelf boost down to 1.5K and we can boost everything above that. And I guess if you wanted to lose some of that attack, you could also bring that down. And if you want more aggression out of your rock bass, a bell boost at maybe 1K to 1.5K is a good spot to boost. And that will just help your bass guitar cut through the mix a bit more. Now, the most important thing here for bass is low end, right? So if I need more low end on my bass guitar, a boost right at 80, kind of like the floor tom, which we went over earlier in the month, boost at 80 is where I'm going to go there for more low end. And when I'm mixing my bass guitar, I'm usually just doing it alongside with the drums, and then eventually the rest of the music. So I'll start with just soloing the drums and the bass while making these moves. And I'll kind of judge how much low end I need by listening to the kick drum. Of course, this stuff tends to change once we get more of the music into the song. Maybe you don't have enough low end or you have too much. But I start off with just mixing this instrument with the drums and then kind of work my way forward from there. Now it's time for some additional control. So the next plugin is a multi-band compressor. And like I said, it's really important for your mix to have a really consistent low end. So I'll usually just create a band from about 300 on down and do a tiny bit of compression on just the low end of the bass. And then you can sort of use this as an EQ for the low end of your bass. If you need more, you can just drive the output of this band up. I wouldn't go that crazy with it, but it's not uncommon to add, a few dBs of gain back once you've compressed all this low end. The last plugin I want to show you in this chain is RBass, and you guys have probably seen this before, but what this plugin does is help your bass translate to things like smaller speakers and earbuds. So for smaller speakers that might not go down to our fundamental bass frequency of 80, we can actually create harmonics higher up in the spectrum for that frequency. So if we set this frequency to 80 and we crank up some of the intensity here, this is going to create some harmonics for that frequency, again, higher up in the frequency spectrum. And that's going to imitate this frequency on smaller speakers. Let's mess around with this so you can hear what it's actually doing. And again, this isn't something that I ever go crazy with, but a little bit of this intensity, again, is going to help with translation to smaller listening and playback systems. That's it for bass. I hope to see you guys back for day 17, where we're going to start to get into the guitars in this mix. Happy mixing, guys. Hey guys, if you like this video, be sure to download your free Ultimate Home Studio Mix Guide with your go-to EQ and compression settings for all your tracks. And also be sure to register for my free online mix training that I hold a couple times a week so that you can learn how to make radio quality music from your home without breaking the bank.